pivoting into our book club segment, we're continuing talking about Matt Taibbi's Hate Inc. And this was a fantastic couple of chapters that we tackled this week and that we're going to be discussing, as you talked about, kind of the WWE-ification of politics and also just the addictive nature of the news media.
Quote one. So this is interesting. The headline is called Controversy Creates Cash. That's the title of the chapter. Taibbi writes, in the fall of 2015, when Trump started to rise again in the polls, I started to see reporters on the trail carrying around Mein Kampf in the paranoid style in American politics. They were looking for political parallels in the past. The book they should have been reading was Controversy Creates Cash by former wrestler/wrestling producer Eric Bischoff of now defunct World Championship Wrestling, which was put out of business by Vince McMahon's WWE. Bischoff was himself a famed heel act. His book is a field guide to how wrestling uses provocation and fake narratives to drum up fan interest and make money. Now, before we move on, we need to define some professional wrestling terms for anybody in the audience that's not privy to them. So I don't know, Gavin, do you know what a heel is?
Yeah, that's like the kind of the opponent, right? Like they're always the bad guy, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the heel is there to piss off the audience. They're there to insult the audience. They're there to piss off the baby face, which is the good guy, right? So WWE and wrestling, it's very archetypal, right? So everything is very clear as day. There's the obvious cheater, the obvious, like it's kind of like Jesse Ventura when he was the heel in the it was like cheat at all costs but always win or something was like what he would always say. It's like very obvious, like I'm the fucking villain, and then you have the baby face guy, and that's kind of how the like rivalry gets going, and that's how they kind of move the story along, because more so than the acrobatics and the actual wrestling that gets people coming back and really invested in WWE is almost like the soap opera style storylines that get built in the background. And really what was amazing and astonishing about Donald Trump, not for any good reason or positive reason, was the way that he was able to transfer this way of thinking and this emotional kind of I guess like emotional state of people and really harness it into a presidential campaign in politics, because he realized that the media would cover him just as if he was an act.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously it's been pointed out that his extensive experience in reality television and just being a TV star himself, of course, gave him a window into the way to kind of rig the processes in his favor by forcing the media to cover him and by just being such a theatrical personality, unafraid to get in the mud, unafraid to sling shit at his opponents and just act like a buffoon, frankly.
100%, dude. 100%. And so we can go on to our next quote two. So he's a heel, but he gets the baby face pop from his base, and that's exactly the formula that Donald Trump was using. He was antagonizing everybody, but he was antagonizing everybody that his base hated, right? And that's what's critical. Where he directed his fury was at the people who his base loathed. They just despised the corporate media, the Clintons, MSNBC, all of those things. So when he was giving all that heel energy, he was getting the baby face pop from his base. Every time he was just rude and disgusting and all that kind of shit to the people who those people hated, they loved him even more. They were like, oh, these guys. And that's why he was able to create that mentality that he was fighting for people when he wasn't, because he was just crucifying the people that he they hated, but he wasn't necessarily, but he obviously wasn't doing anything policy wise to benefit their lives materially.
And ingeniously, Trump made the media the heel to his base. To him, he constantly would point out how they were cheating him and covering him unfairly, making them out to ultimately be the real opponent or villain that he was up against, which of course was manifesting in Hillary Clinton. But I think it's worth saying that it's so accurate that he was the baby face to his base, and that he made the media his heel, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And we can go, a quote 3 is right up there. Yeah. Trump created a giant free promotion machine. Exactly. So he created a giant free promotion machine in the news media, which seemed never to grasp what he was doing. Either that or it did and it didn't care. I'm pretty sure it's the latter. They were suckers for it, noted Richards, who's a guy that he talks about earlier in the chapter. Not necessarily, I can't remember his first name. They're giving him the oxygen he needs. It feeds right into what he's doing. Exactly. Yeah. What they're doing is they're creating the perfect conditions for a forest fire, and then all Trump has to do is walk in with a match. All he has to do is light the tinder that they've provided him with. And they would do it immediately. They would all go up in flame. He would be on every fucking show. Everybody would be talking about it. And it would be that same fucking formula where his base loves him even more as everybody else is raining shit down on him.
Yeah. And this is an interesting discussion because sometimes myself and other people have suggested that we need someone on the left to do the same kind of a thing, and that they're unafraid to just do what it takes to get that media attention, force the media to cover you. And if that, if you have to do that by, going out there and doing something kind of scandalous or provocative and hopefully not in a hateful vein like Donald Trump did, but you can still create a kind of a ruckus and force the media to cover you. But the only problem with that approach, as someone who would be trying to court more of like I guess more of a liberal or like lefty demographic, is that people that usually vote Democrat usually have a lot more respect for the media institution. So, if the media is telling those people that they're supposed to hate Bernie Sanders, for example, unfortunately, a lot of people are just going to go along with that because, again, they don't look at the media as a heel or an antagonistic force. They look at it as a, institution of respect and honor and all that stuff.
Well, that's changing, though. Like 30% of the people
sure.
still feel that way. It's a very low number.
Well, that's true to an extent. But if you think about who votes in a Democratic primary, I don't think that is 30%. True. Yeah, exactly. Because who votes in a Democratic primary is unfortunately not very reflective of the population. You do have a lot of more academic types, more, PMC types that are voting in those primaries. So it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky line to walk, for example, trying to win a Democratic primary as a bold, populist, anti-establishment character like Bernie Sanders. And we talked about how Bernie maybe should have leaned more into those qualities and been more aggressive. But then there is that element which you're up against, which is that a lot of the voters that you unfortunately need, they do trust the media. And if you piss off the media and ruffle their feathers, then they're going to look at that as a sin, not as an alpha male chest beating move like Trump's base did.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It's true. There is a financial pulse towards research-free stories. So he makes the point in this chapter of how much the media covered Trump, and it actually makes the point that MSNBC and CNN covered Trump more than even Breitbart or those kinds of like hardcore right-wing publications, right? And he says there's a financial pull towards research-free stories. So writing 1,200 words of jokes about Trump's tweets costs less than sending a reporter undercover in a Mexican maquiladora. But that's not why we need to do the one and not the other, right? And that's the kind of thing that Gavin and I are always talking about the perverse incentives of having capitalism and journalism collide, right? You can't have and this is why we always maintain the same critique of corporate cash in politics and corporate cash in journalism, because it is fundamentally just broken logic to me. The people who try and make the argument that the people who are in power shouldn't be influenced by corporate cash, but the individuals who are supposed to be holding them accountable, they can be completely awash in corporate cash, and that's not a problem. So that's obviously flawed. And of course, Gavin and I are doing commentary right now, right? And of course, that's not us going to a fucking Mexican maquiladora either and reporting on shit. But the fact of the matter is that we're not purporting to be journalists. We're not purporting to be news organizations, and we don't have the fucking budget. And if we did, you can sure as shit imagine that you will see Gavin and I all over the fucking place on the ground and not just sitting behind our microphones.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so true. And I think it was just so brought to fruition in the Trump era where, I remember reading hundreds and hundreds of articles just like, in moments of downtime, waiting in line at Chipotle or like waiting for the bus or something like that, where, you're just meaningly scrolling through like a Salon article detailing Trump's latest, scandalous, whatever the fuck. And you're just like, why exactly am I reading this? Like, this doesn't really have any bearing on anything around me, but people are sure pissed off. And, I guess I'm mildly entertained to be reading about it. That was kind of just the model of, that kind of like pop journalism that went on hardcore under the Trump era, that clickbaity shit that was just basically existed to perpetuate the outrage machine about Donald Trump, which ironically, all these people that read those articles were the ones that nominally wanted him defeated the most. Although, as Taibbi explains, it was that very behavior, which was exactly what he wanted. He wants you to repeat the fact that he said Hillary Clinton got schlonged. He wants every journalist to go out and, print that 500 times and say it a million times and act outraged about it. That way, the attention's on him. Mission accomplished.
100%. No press is bad press.
Yeah.
Bad press is no press.
Yep.
Etc. But this moves on to the second chapter that we're talking about, and it fed magnificently off of what you said, which is that the news is an addictive product, and they market it exactly like that. Like cigarettes, this product can have a profound negative impact on your health. Almost without exception, it will make you lonelier, more anxious, more distrustful of others, and more depressed. And then there's a follow-up quote that I wanted to read before we unpack it.
Quote 6?
Yeah. I think it's the top one. I may have made it quote 5. Oh, there we go. The news is a consumer product. If you take nothing else from this book, please try to remember this. Years ago, I, being Matt Taibbi, trained myself to use this trick. Before clicking on any article, I'd imagine the title of the news outlet emblazoned on a cigarette box or candy wrapper, as in, I'm going to run outside for an MSNBC. And I think that that's hilarious, one, framing, but two, very accurate, right? Because people get cravings for news. People want to feel like, and this is another point that he makes where in this book where he talks about how places like MSNBC hosts like Rachel Maddow made watching their program synonymous with resisting what was happening. And so they were a part of the fight just simply by tuning in, which is completely lazy. You don't actually have to do anything. Just kind of like how us talking on the microphone, this isn't activism, this is commentary. You know what I mean? Right. But they believed in and they bought that they were actually changing the world just by, watching.
Exactly. And to be honest, it kind of reminds me of, back in the day, TYT, when they were always doing their like huge fundraising drives and like, be part of the progressive army, the TYT army. Like, we are the rebel headquarters. Like, this show is the resistance. It was the same thing, just in a slightly different lane, but same shtick, right? By watching fucking TYT or MSNBC, it's not like you were in any way significantly or seriously contributing to a resistance of, government tyranny or anything like that. No, you were just, entertaining yourself. Essentially, it just seemed more virtuous because it's about quote unquote serious things and not about, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West or whatever the fuck all the other serfs are out there reading about that aren't as apparently interested in all this bullshit. But the point is that it's so true that, the media addicts you into coming back because it makes you feel like if you're not there, you're missing out, and that you're, that you're not going to know about the latest breaking story, every 5 seconds on CNN or whatever. Everything is a all caps breaking story. And that, deluge of breaking stories, it makes you feel like, oh shit, if I don't, check CNN, I'm not going to hear about the latest breaking news that's going on that everyone's going to be talking about or whatever. You don't want to feel like you're out of the loop or uninformed on the latest shocking scandal or whatever is going on.
100%, dude. The notion that you are reading the truth and not consuming a product is the first deception of commercial media. It's the same with conservative or liberal brands, or for that matter, we should add anybody that you're seeing for fucking any ideology. In both cases, the product is an attention grabber and a mental stimulus. Look, and here's the reality about this, guys. The fact of the matter is that the media system in this country is so broken, and the channels with which you have to work within in order to access people, that it's sort of become the point that you have to grab people's attention with your headline, which only continues to perpetuate this issue. So one of the things that Gavin and I have thought of doing and tried to do, and credit to Gavin because this was his fucking idea, was to try and make headlines that look like they're fucking smut or like fucking just like stimulating, like, oh god, this is fucking crazy. But then when you look at our conversation, it's like we had the conversation before we put it on there, or the headline is to grab you, and then we have a nuanced conversation about what the fuck is happening. But the algorithm won't promote you. People won't click on your video. You can't even get to the point where you're having a conversation with anybody unless you participate in this.
Yeah, it's so true.
And that's not that you're deceiving people or not like telling you the truth, but it is the fact, like obviously Gavin and I are telling you to the best of our abilities what the fuck we think, what reason do we have to lie or fucking facilitate anything? We don't. But yeah, it doesn't mean that this isn't technically a product, and we would be remiss if we were telling you guys that we weren't trying to entertain you and make sure that this was engaging as well as informative. That's why we openly call it infotainment. I don't think that's a dig. I think that's important to have in balance with the way that there's infotainment in all facilities or all political arenas besides real left politics if we were to abandon ship.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that our honesty about that fact is what separates us from a lot of the shows that are the problem. If you turn on Fox News or MSNBC, half the time you're presented with opinion commentary, but it's presented as if it's just news. It's, if you just flip on Fox and, Tucker Carlson is on, and you're not super plugged in, and you don't really know a lot about the media, and you're not thinking deeply about this stuff like we are, like Matt Taibbi is writing about, you're just gonna be like, that's the newscaster, he's telling me the news, or Rachel Maddow or whoever, not even realizing that you're completely being sold a partisan agenda, an agenda for corporate America, for all of these things. That's all left out of the picture. So by just being upfront and being honest that we're not an objective news show, and that we're not probably the number one place you should be going to get your objective journalism. That's an honesty that's not even upheld on the quote unquote professional, authoritative, corporate news outlets that the YouTube algorithm promotes in expense of channels like us, which are honest about that.
Yeah, for sure. Next one. If we in the press were being honest with the audience, we would tell them the world is now so complex you cannot ever hope to be truly informed. We can tell you a few broad strokes, but that's it. And I do think that honesty is important. And to give a couple of examples that he's talking about, right, which is to say he's getting granular. He's saying it would be impossible for us, the press, to walk people through tax legislation because it's 2,000 pages. The people who are voting on it aren't voting on or aren't reading it. He gives the example of like Dodd-Frank when he was covering the 2008 crisis, and he would talk about how none of the Congress people at all had any idea what a fucking credit default swap was, what a derivative was. And there would be maybe 2 aides on Capitol Hill that had a vague idea of what was going on. And then it would be all of the lobbyists who knew exactly what was going on, fucking feeding these people with misinformation. And so all you can do as the press and say, this is what I understand to the best of my ability. This is why I think this is shady, but you're not going to be able to get granular all the way down. This is making the average Joe understand what a fucking derivative is and why, these AAA mortgage bonds were not actually AAA mortgage bonds. All you can really say is that they are, and that's not giving people the nuts and bolts that would be required to completely remove any deception if you wanted to include it there.
Yeah, and what's ironic is that the stories that the media does get granular with and doesn't just cover with broad strokes are the ones that are actually unserious drivel. Remember Benghazi, remember Russiagate. These were the stories that were covered with
weapons of mass destruction. But
yeah, weapons of mass. These were the ones that were covered with a magnifying glass, which the media broke down night after night, incessantly trying to explain to their audience the significance of them and why they needed to be freaking out about these things. But in the end, all of those just, it all just amounted to nothing. It was all a lie, or at least it was maybe a grain of truth, in the case of Russiagate that was just massively expounded upon, a mountain out of a molehill, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's what he gets to in either the next quote, I think. Well, we'll talk about this first. So talk about horrors. Not only is the structure of the modern economy inaccessible to ordinary consumers, it can be inaccessible to the people setting public policy. Often it's beyond the CEOs in relevant industries. AIG sank in part because executives did not understand its own financial products. There are similar complexity issues in almost every field, from energy to medicine to pollution science to nuclear weapons maintenance. This is exactly what we were saying before. And then on quote 10, I believe, oh yeah, this is great. I wanted to get your reaction to this as well. He says, American Psycho was a book about how the American idea of personality is constructed around things we buy. We may be inane monsters inside, but we work hard to have good consumer taste on the surface. Ellis understood that most of us, when we read the news, are really just telling ourselves a story about who we like to think we are when we look in the mirror. And I think that that's so true in how everybody just creates their own media bubble for themselves that kind of underscores the narrative that they want to live. If I'm in the PMC class and I want to feel okay and comfortable in my wealth, but I also want to feel like I'm a humanitarian, I'm going to read Vox News every day and The Atlantic, because it's never going to quite challenge me to the point of I need to reconsider my entire lifestyle. It's going to constantly reassure me that my lifestyle is okay, but it will be like, you know what? I was mesmerized by a fry cook the other day. And like, oh my God, there was a real Annie Lowrey piece. I don't mean to get into a digression. There was a real Annie Lowrey piece who, if you don't know, is a writer for The Atlantic. She wrote this book called I think it was called like Give People Money. She is married to every blue check mark's favorite liberal ass fucking pundit, Ezra Klein, though not that her spouse is something to dig on her. just to give you an idea of the social circle that this woman is coming from. She wrote about how like she like saw this like fucking prep cook that like mesmerized her, and like was writing this whole piece in the Atlantic about like, oh, like we need like working class dignity and all this kind of shit. Never once mentions the fact that maybe we should raise the fucking minimum wage so that guy doesn't go home to fucking starve.
Yeah, that's so true, and just such an accurate point about how not only does the media, give us the news or the information that we want to see to reaffirm our biases, but it makes us feel better about ourselves in the process. It's giving you that dose of the virtuous or whatever you want to call it that you just described with that article. So not only is it confirming your biases, but it's also, kind of giving you a little bit of a pat on the back too.
Yeah, 100%. Reassuring and reaffirming your belief system.
Yeah.
And then maybe I actually didn't grab the quote that I thought I was going to. But anyway, this is the last quote I think I grabbed. And it just said, in the most recent media appearance, Woodward, being Bob Woodward of Woodward and Bernstein, repeated a common trope in anti-Trump media, one borrowed from the Lewinsky era, i.e. that the investigative walls are closing in, and the walls involve the felony campaign finance charge admitted to by Trump lawyer Michael Cohen. But except the follow-up that Matt Taibbi has to this paragraph is Bob Woodward, when asked, did you look for evidence? He was like, I looked damn hard and I couldn't find it anywhere. But because the media narrative and the way that it infected so many people all the way up to Bob Woodward, and of course Bob Woodward kind of sold out a long time ago, but he was like, I looked for it, and he has obviously a lot of confidence in himself as an investigative journalism. And it's so funny that he was like, no, I couldn't find any evidence of that anywhere. Yet he's so sure that it's out there because of this fucking propaganda, dude. And it affects even people like Bob Woodward, which I think is the point that Matt Taibbi is trying to make here by, kind of inserting somebody with so much clout who just fucking fell on their face.
Oh yeah. And despite the fact that,